I think making music is never very easy. I had this idea before I ever made anything that it was this fun, pleasurable, glamorous job. When I started to make my own tracks, I realized it's really work. I wonder sometimes, is music so difficult and almost self-punishing for other people? I think it varies. Many people, I imagine, have this similar struggle where, you're hunched over, sweating and drinking your 10th cup of coffee and thinking, can I get out of this? Will this song ever work? But it's also thrilling to have that little bit of uncertainty when you're in the middle of something, because that way if you do achieve it, you've come out on the other end having grown in some way, done something new. I started recording sounds years before I started making music. I lived in a very old building and the heater was clunking and clunking and clunking. And I decided I'll record this and maybe it'll be interesting. And as soon as I started doing that, I was hooked. It was like a drug. Everywhere I went, I wanted to record. Then when I started playing around with music, I found that all of those recordings finally had this purpose, which was they were very unique. They came from my personal life, my wanderings through the world, and that with some technical shaping, they could all really be musical instruments. I think it's fun to play with sounds that don't have that direct definition. You're not forcing the listener to have a certain reaction. If you use the sound of pipes kind of squealing in the walls when you turn on the water, that could be a neutral sound, it could be a creepy sound, or it could be comforting, like your mom's house makes weird creaky sounds and that reminds you of being safe and little. That ambiguity that comes with unconventional sounds excites me. It almost turns a song into something that's more dimensional. I'm always wrong in the sense of maybe I'll go on a trip and I'll think this will be really exciting and there'll be great sounds, but a place that's very visually exciting can often be sonically okay, and some boring old house, you might not be inspired visually, but the sounds could be really cool. I have a gate that has this abrupt, jarring, jolting rattle. Recently, someone came in through the gate and they were like, what was that? And I was like, oh, that sound is actually really dramatic and interesting. Sometimes the most exciting sounds are right in front of you. You don't have to go far to find them. Thinking deeply about the way sound makes you feel is always with me, because one of the books I read talks a lot about how music typically evokes garden variety emotions, which is happy, sad, angry, mad. That always stuck with me because I need music that challenges the boundaries between emotions, or even challenges being qualified as having any specific emotion. There's a mystery to that I find very compelling, that you're moved emotionally, but you're not quite sure what emotion you're experiencing. It's just an alertness and a good feeling. And that definitely ties into the field recording work, looking for these sounds that are ambiguous and not totally dark and not totally bright, just somewhere in the middle. My goal with my music is I'm trying to face fears and not censor myself. there's a commitment to being a bit bumpy, and at the same time, I'm trying to temper that with traditional beauty, a melody or some tonal bed of sound, working against a sound or a percussive effect. It sort of reflects my view of the world, which is that there's just plain beauty is a good thing, but life isn't that simple. It's asking a lot of the listener, but that's always more important than actually making the best song I could make. It's like, let me make the best song with the confines of does it feel true to a real life experience. Music was in the house for sure, but no one was a musician in my family, and I didn't know musicians. It didn't seem like something you could actually do. When I was about 8 years old, my parents had inherited this really old, never in tune piano, and they, asked my brother and I if we'd like to learn to play. We both took lessons for a little bit. He quit very quickly, and I followed. Learning how to read music felt impossible to me. Part of it was I couldn't sit still as a kid, and I was a slow learner of reading in general. I was very ADD, I was always running around, and it was like I wanted to feel life intensely. How much can you feel? How intense can things feel? And often, like when I was a kid, I would listen to sort of noise rock and experimental stuff. So intensity has always been something that excited me in music. I guess that makes me feel very alive, and so in my music I want to explore that little fine edge of, am I so overwhelmed that I'm in pain, or is this fun? It's not a sustainable long-term thing, but it's certainly in all of my music at some point. When I was done with college, I took a class at NYU. It was sound for video games, and it blew my mind. I spoke to my professor, and he said, you should probably live in LA if you want to do that. I applied to USC because USC has one of the oldest and strongest sound departments in film schools. So they really treat sound as an art form there. About halfway through my program, I took a class. It was called Synthesizer Techniques. We used a little bit of Ableton Live and just started making simple music like 4-to-the-floor beats. And I just knew I had to focus on music. LA is a very spread out city where you can easily spend days alone, and it's harder to hunt a bunch of people down and say, am I making music the right way? It didn't occur to me that what I was doing was particularly different or good or bad. It didn't even matter because it felt so good to do it. Early on, I would record vocals in a kind of dingy apartment. There would be street sounds and LA sounds, and I thought, okay, well, this is frustrating, but how could I creatively wrestle with the situation? That led me to start using this noise reduction software. If you really push it to its limits, the voice starts to crunch and sound crazy. I thought, oh, that's cool, processing the voice to sound distorted, that's fun. And I would start using a plugin to repitch my voice. My voice, starting off out of tune and noisy, ended up becoming perhaps more exciting than a perfect take in a studio. I thought, oh, well, once everything's in the computer, you just create a new reality. There is no sense of any sound being terribly precious. That was very freeing. It's fun to experiment with throwing your voice through effects, layering yourself and multiplying yourself. But I'd like to give myself the option of exposing my voice more nakedly, because that's a new challenge, you know. It's very scary.
Morning, Mama, Mama, I am broken. Morning, Mama, Mama, I've misspoken. And
I guess it doesn't feel very important to me to be a great lyricist. I think other people do that better. I'd rather it feel true than really well said. Frequently it's singing about or to some specific person. It's that idea of having this very intimate experience, like a conversation.
I see you, baby, I see you small, I see you only made up of bones. I see you chubby, I see you
I went through a phase where I was afraid to learn too much about intentional composition, where you sit down and you almost hear the notes in your head and you know where you're going and you're following rules. And after I made my last record, that fear kind of went away, because it was so difficult to try to mix a record that had like hundreds of layers of tracks and not know what key I was in, you know, and not know what the difference between harmonic minor and natural minor were. And so a lot of my songs are in minor and they're going in and out of different keys, but I didn't know what keys were. And so the amount of time I wasted trying to figure out why there was dissonance here and why something felt wrong inspired me to just become a bit more educated about these fundamentals. There's a school in Pasadena called Pasadena City College. Right now I'm in my second semester of this 2-year, basically associates in music degree, and it involves keyboard skills, tonal theory, particularly learning the rules of harmonic progression. This theory teacher I have now, he says, if you can't make it, you can't break it, and I like that philosophy of embracing as much convention as you can with this ulterior motive of getting sand in the joints of it at some point down the line. Now I have this large set of songs that I believe will be my next record. They're all half made, and I want to infuse those songs with a little bit of this new knowledge. Ultimately, I can't create if I'm not feeling really curious about the world or something in the world, and right now, to my surprise, for sure, it's definitely this interest in classical music and how it's constructed. I'm not sure where it will lead. I just sort of have this trust in the learning process that something interesting will happen as a result.